All right, welcome back to the deep dive.
Today, we're going deep on something that's, kind of all around us all the time, but we don't always think about it, and that is light, and specifically the impact of light on our health. And I think this is a particularly interesting topic for us because, as a society, we're kind of increasingly bathed in artificial light, right? From our screens, our phones, our computers, the lights in our homes, street lights, you name it. And it's just kind of always there.
Yeah, it's become almost like an inescapable part of modern life, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's fascinating to me is that, we often associate light with, positive things like, energy and wakefulness and happiness and all these, positive attributes. But it turns out that too much light or the wrong kind of light at the wrong time can have some, pretty profound effects on our health.
Right. It's really about understanding the nuances, isn't it? It's not just about the presence or absence of light, but the timing, the intensity, the color, all of these factors come into play. Exactly. And that's what we're going to be diving into today. And I think, for our listeners who, really are interested in, taking control of their health and really understanding, how to optimize their well-being, this is a really crucial topic to understand because it's something that, we can actually do something about. We can actually make changes in our environment and our habits to, mitigate some of these potential negative effects. And you've actually sent over a really fascinating collection of studies for us to kind of dig into today. Some of these are looking at, the impact of light at night. Some are looking at the effects of blue light specifically. And, we're going to be really looking at this from a variety of different angles.
Yeah, we've got studies on the link between light exposure and things like our risk of mortality, developing cancer, the health of our eyes and our skin, even how our bodies manage energy and metabolism. It's really a broad spectrum.
So our mission today is to kind of pull out the key insights from these studies and really understand what they mean for, you, the listener, in your everyday life. How might the light in your life be influencing your health, and what can you do about it?
Exactly. We're aiming to give you that practical knowledge so you can make informed choices about how you manage your own light environment.
Perfect. All right, so let's jump right in with something that I think is a really good foundation for this whole conversation, and that is the potential link between light at night and our lifespan and our risk of developing cardiometabolic diseases.
Yeah, this is a critical area, and there's a really interesting study that used data from the UK Biobank. They followed nearly 89,000 people for several years and collected a remarkable amount of data on their nighttime light exposure. Over 14 million hours of data, actually.
14 million hours. That's mind-boggling. So what did they find after analyzing all that data? I'm really curious.
Well, the main takeaway was pretty stark. They found that people who were exposed to brighter light at night had a higher risk of dying from any cause and a higher risk of dying from what we call cardiometabolic causes specifically.
Cardiometabolic. I feel like we're hearing that term more and more these days. Can you break down what that actually means in this context? I think that'd be really helpful for our listeners.
Absolutely. So when we talk about cardiometabolic mortality, we're essentially talking about deaths that are caused by diseases affecting the circulatory system, like heart attacks and strokes, or endocrine and metabolic diseases, things like ischemic heart disease, cerebrovascular diseases, diabetes, other metabolic disorders, and obesity were the main culprits in this study.
So really serious health issues, not just feeling a bit off, but potentially life-threatening
Right,
conditions.
exactly.
And how did the researchers try to understand the connection between light at night and these risks? Do they have any theories on the mechanisms involved?
Well, they use some sophisticated models to look at how light exposure at night might be affecting our internal body clocks, our circadian rhythm, if you will. And they found that people with a suppressed circadian amplitude, meaning their natural daily rhythm wasn't as strong, and those with a deviated circadian phase, meaning their internal clock was out of sync with the natural day-night cycle, were at higher risk.
It's like their bodies were living in the wrong time zone constantly.
In a way, yeah. And those disruptions were associated with those increased risk of both all-cause and cardiometabolic mortality.
So it's not just about getting enough sleep, but about aligning our sleep with our natural circadian rhythms and ensuring a truly dark environment at night.
Precisely. That's the key message here.
Okay, that's a pretty powerful takeaway.
Right.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about another major health concern, cancer. You sent over a global study looking at the potential link between artificial light at night and cancer rates across the world.
Yes, this was a fascinating study. It was an ecological study which means it looked at trends across large populations rather than individuals. In this case, they looked at 158 countries and used satellite data to measure artificial light at night, specifically in protected areas.
Protected areas. I'm curious, why focus on those specific areas? What's the reasoning behind that?
The idea is that protected areas are supposed to be relatively undisturbed natural environments, so the amount of artificial light that spills into those areas can be a good indicator of the overall level of light pollution in a country.
I see, that makes sense. So they compared these light pollution levels with cancer rates in these countries.
Exactly. They used two measures of light pollution, the Protected Area Light Pollution Indicator, or PALI, and the Protected Area Human Influence Indicator, or PAHI, and they compared these with age-standardized rates of various cancers.
Okay, and what did they find? Was there a correlation between light pollution and cancer?
Yes, they found a positive correlation between both PALI and PAHI and the age-standardized rates of all forms of cancer combined, as well as the four most common cancers globally:
Yeah.
lung, breast, colorectal, and prostate cancer. Basically, countries with higher levels of light pollution tended to have higher rates of these cancers.
So a worrying trend, especially considering how pervasive light pollution is becoming.
Absolutely.
Did they account for other factors that might be contributing to cancer rates in these countries, like, differences in healthcare systems, lifestyle factors, things like that?
Yes, they did. They adjusted for things like population size, electricity consumption, air pollution levels, and forest cover. And even after controlling for those factors, the positive correlations between PAHI and all forms of cancer, lung cancer, and breast cancer remain statistically significant.
So the link with light pollution seems pretty robust, even after taking those other variables into account.
Right.
Fascinating. And did they notice any variations in this link, depending on the economic status of the countries? Did they see any differences there?
Yeah, they did actually. They found that the overall age-standardized rate of all cancers increased with the income status of a country. And when they looked at the correlations within each income bracket, they found some interesting patterns. For instance, pay A was significantly correlated with colorectal cancer in lower middle income countries and with breast cancer in upper middle income countries. Pay AI, on the other hand, showed significant associations with lung cancer in lower income countries, colorectal cancer in lower middle income countries, and with all forms of cancer, lung, breast, and colorectal cancers in upper middle income countries, as well as breast cancer in high income countries.
So the picture gets a bit more complex when you look at the economic context. It seems like the relationship between light pollution and specific cancers might vary depending on a country's level of development. It's interesting. What about the potential mechanisms behind this link between light at night and cancer? Did the study offer any insights into how that might work?
Yeah, they discussed a couple of key mechanisms. One is the disruption of the circadian system, which we've already talked about. Light at night can interfere with our natural sleep-wake cycles and throw off our internal clocks, and that can have a cascading effect on various biological processes. The other mechanism they highlighted is the suppression of melatonin, which is a hormone that's crucial for regulating our sleep, but also has anti-cancer properties.
It seems like melatonin is a recurring theme in this conversation.
It definitely is, and it's a really important one.
And they actually referenced other research supporting this link with cancer.
Yes, they mentioned a meta-analysis from 2014 that found a 17% increased risk of breast cancer in women who were exposed to high levels of artificial light at night. And they also pointed to research suggesting that blue light, which is very common in modern LED lighting, is particularly effective at suppressing melatonin production.
Okay, so this isn't just about sleep disruption, but a potential direct link to cancer development through hormonal pathways.
That's right.
All right, let's focus in on this blue light component now. We got a few studies looking specifically at the effects of blue light on our health, starting with its impact on eye health. And this is something I know a lot of people are concerned about, especially with how much time we spend on digital devices these days.
Yeah, it's a growing concern. And this first study we have is an in vitro study, which means it was done in a lab using cells rather than living organisms. They looked at human retinal pigment epithelial cells, or ARPE19 cells for short. These are the cells that form a layer at the back of the eye that supports the photoreceptor cells that are responsible for our vision.
So these are really crucial cells for our eyesight. And what did they find when they exposed these cells to blue light?
Well, they found that short-wavelength blue light was particularly damaging to these cells. It messed with the function of their mitochondria, which are the powerhouses within cells, and it seemed to increase levels of oxidative stress and inflammation. And these are all factors that are implicated in the development of age-related macular degeneration, or AMD, which is a leading cause of vision loss in older adults.
So blue light could be directly damaging the cells that are essential for our vision, potentially contributing to eye problems down the line.
That's what this research suggests, yeah.
That's pretty worrying. Did they find anything that could potentially protect these cells from blue light damage?
Well, that's the interesting part. They also looked at the effects of red light exposure.
Red light, so like the opposite end of the spectrum from blue light.
Exactly. And they found that red light actually helped to blunt the negative effects of blue light on cell viability and mitochondrial function. It seems like red light might have a protective effect at the cellular level.
So almost like a yin and yang of light. It's fascinating. Why do you think red light might have this protective effect?
That's a good question. The researchers speculate that red light, with its longer wavelength, might activate different cellular pathways that help to counteract the damage caused by blue light. But it's still an area that needs more research.
Okay, so more to uncover there. But it's a hopeful finding nonetheless.
And they didn't just look at the function of these cells, right? They also looked at their structural integrity.
Yes, they did. They looked at the tight junctions between the ARP19 cells, which are essentially like seals that control what passes between cells. And they found that blue light exposure caused a reduction in transepithelial resistance, which indicates a weakening of those tight junctions. So it seems like blue light might be compromising those important barriers in the eye as well.
Wow, so blue light is affecting these cells on multiple levels.
It seems so, yeah. And again, they found that red light seemed to have a protective effect here too. Okay, so some interesting findings there. Definitely gives us something to think about in terms of our light exposure, especially from screens.
Definitely.
Now, let's move from the inside of our eyes to the surface of our bodies, our skin. You've included a review that looks at the impact of blue light on skin health. And I think this is particularly relevant given how much time many of us spend looking at screens, as we've already discussed.
Right, it's a very timely topic. And this review looked at the effects of blue light emitted from electronic devices, as well as indoor lighting, on our skin.
So what were the main concerns they highlighted? What does blue light do to our skin?
Well, the review linked blue light exposure to accelerated skin aging, things like wrinkles and loss of elasticity, and to cutaneous hyperpigmentation, which is basically the development of dark spots and patches on the skin. It also talked about how blue light can disrupt our circadian rhythm by affecting melatonin production and how that can have consequences for skin health as well.
So it's not just the direct impact on the skin itself, but also the indirect effects through hormonal disruption. And they talked about how this circadian disruption might affect the skin's natural processes of repair and regeneration, right?
Yes, they did. They mentioned research showing that blue light can actually reduce the activity of certain clock genes in skin cells. So it seems like even our skin cells have their own internal clocks that can be influenced by light.
That's amazing. Our bodies are so intricate. But I have to ask, is all blue light exposure bad for our skin? Or are there any potential benefits?
That's a great question. And the review did actually point out that blue light can have therapeutic benefits for some skin conditions like acne and psoriasis. So it's not all negative.
Okay, so there's a bit of a nuance there. But for those of us who are concerned about the potential negative effects, what did the review recommend for minimizing our exposure?
The recommendations were pretty straightforward. Reduce your screen time, take regular breaks from your devices, consider using blue light filters on your screens or blue light blocking glasses, and utilize night mode settings on your electronics to reduce blue light emission in the evenings.
Good practical tips. Easier said than done, but definitely things we can all try to implement.
Right. And they also recommended being mindful of the overall lighting levels at night, not just from screens, but from all sources, to minimize potential melatonin suppression.
Okay, so being mindful of our entire light environment, it's a holistic approach.
Exactly.
Now, you also included a study that looked at blue light exposure and skin cancer in mice, which is a bit concerning.
Yeah, this was a pretty significant study. They exposed hairless mice to daily irradiation from different colored LED lights, blue, white, green, and red, for a whole year.
A whole year, that's a long time. So what happened?
Well, the key finding was that only the mice exposed to blue light developed skin cancer. The mice in the other groups, white, green, and red light, didn't show any signs of cancer.
Wow, that's a pretty direct link. What was happening in the skin of the blue light exposed mice? Did they find any clues about the mechanisms involved?
Yeah, they found that blue light increased markers of cell proliferation, meaning the skin cells were dividing more rapidly, which is a hallmark of cancer. They also saw a decrease in collagen expression, which is important for maintaining the structural integrity of the skin. And they also found evidence that blue light triggered an inflammatory response in the skin involving certain immune cells called neutrophils and macrophages, which have been implicated in cancer development.
So it seems like blue light might be triggering a whole cascade of events in the skin that ultimately leads to cancer formation in these mice.
That's what the research suggests, yeah.
All right, let's switch gears again and talk about another area where light, and specifically blue light, seems to be playing a role. Metabolism. You sent over a study that looked at this in mice.
Yes, this was a really interesting study. They fed mice either a normal diet or a high-fat diet, and then exposed them to different colors of light during the daytime, blue, white, or red, for 8 weeks.
Okay, so they were looking at how light exposure might influence how their bodies processed energy and stored fat.
Exactly, and they found that blue light had a significant impact on the mice that were eating a high-fat diet. It caused them to gain more weight, accumulate more fat, and develop problems with their blood sugar regulation. But these effects weren't seen in the mice that were eating a normal diet.
So blue light seems to worsen the metabolic effects of a poor diet.
It seems so, yes.
What was happening inside their bodies that might explain this?
They found that blue light caused the fat cells in these mice to become larger and more inflamed. And they also saw changes in the expression of genes involved in fat metabolism and inflammation within the fat tissue. And interestingly, they found that the effects of blue light and green light were pretty similar in many of these aspects.
So it's not just blue light that's a concern here, but potentially a broader range of wavelengths.
That's right.
And did they find that blue light also affected the internal clocks within their fat cells?
Yes, they did. They found that blue light increased the expression of several key circadian clock genes in the white adipose tissue, which is the main type of fat tissue in our bodies.
Wow, so even our fat cells have their own internal clocks that can be disrupted by light.
It seems so. It's really remarkable how pervasive the influence of light is on our biology.
And what do they think is the mechanism behind this link between blue light and these metabolic changes?
Well, they proposed that it might be related to a stress hormone called corticosterone in mice, which is similar to cortisol in humans. They found that blue light exposure led to increased levels of corticosterone in the blood and increased the number of receptors for this hormone in the fat tissue. And their theory is that this surge in corticosterone might be driving the changes in the circadian clock genes within the fat tissue, which then leads to those negative metabolic effects. They even did some experiments in the lab that supported this idea.
So blue light might be increasing stress hormone levels, which then throws off the internal clocks in our fat cells, ultimately making us more prone to weight gain and metabolic problems.
That's the current thinking, yes.
Okay, that's a pretty complex chain of events. Now, let's talk about a particularly vulnerable group, children. You included a study that looked at the effects of blue light on melatonin suppression in young children.
Yes, this is a very important study. They looked at children between the ages of 3 and 5 and how they responded to evening light exposure.
And what did they find?
Well, they found that even relatively low levels of light in the evening, as low as 5 lux, caused a significant suppression of melatonin production in these children. The average suppression was around 85%, which is a lot. And what's more, their melatonin levels remained suppressed for at least 50 minutes after the light was turned off.
So even brief exposure to dim light in the evening can have a prolonged effect on melatonin levels in young children. Why are children so sensitive to light compared to adults?
It's likely due to the developmental characteristics of their eyes. Children have larger pupils and their lenses are more transparent, so more light reaches their retinas, which makes them more photosensitive.
So creating a truly dark environment for children in the hours leading up to bedtime is especially important.
Absolutely.
Okay, one last study to discuss. This one looked at the impact of sleeping with the lights on, even dim lights, on metabolic health in adults.
Yeah, this study is really relevant because many people sleep with some level of light in their bedrooms, whether it's from a nightlight, street lights, or even just the glow of electronic devices.
Exactly. And they found that even that low level of light exposure during sleep had negative effects.
They did. They found that just one night of sleeping with a dim light on, around 100 lux, impaired glucose homeostasis the next morning. Specifically, they saw signs of increased insulin resistance.
It's pretty surprising for such a short exposure. Did they measure melatonin levels in this study?
They did, and interestingly, melatonin levels were similar between the dim light and the dark conditions. So The negative effects on glucose metabolism seem to be happening through a pathway that's independent of melatonin in this case.
So light during sleep is affecting our metabolism in a way that's not directly related to melatonin suppression. That's interesting. What other changes did they observe?
They found that the participants who slept with the light on had disruptions in their sleep architecture. They spent more time in lighter stages of sleep and less time in the deeper, more restorative stages of sleep. And they also showed signs of increased activity in their sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response during sleep.
So even dim light is keeping our bodies in a more alert state than they should be during sleep.
That's right.
And this increased sympathetic activity was linked to the impaired glucose metabolism.
Yes, they found a direct association between the two.
Wow, so sleeping with the lights on, even dim lights, can have a pretty immediate impact on our metabolic health.
It seems so.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into the world of light and its effects on our health. And I think the overarching message here is that light, especially blue light and light at night, has a much more profound impact on our bodies than we often realize. It's not just about how well we see or how easily we fall asleep. It affects our hormones, our metabolism, our risk of developing chronic diseases. It really is something we need to pay more attention to.
I completely agree. And the good news is that there are things we can do to mitigate these negative effects. We can be more mindful of our light exposure, especially in the evenings and at night. We can use blue light filters, dim our lights, create darker sleep environments. We have the power to make changes that can benefit our health in the long run.
Exactly. So to our listeners, I encourage you to take this information and really think about your own daily exposure to light. Are there any small changes you can make to optimize your light environment? Maybe dim your lights earlier in the evening, switch to night mode on your devices, or invest in some blackout curtains for your bedroom. Every little bit helps.
Absolutely. And if any of the specific areas we've discussed today have sparked your interest, I encourage you to do some further research and exploration on your own. There's a wealth of information out there.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.